But we've been talking about boldness, and we've been talking for the last few weeks. This is our last week talking about that. Next week is Redneck Appreciation Night, which is the boldest thing you can do is wear a mullet. And so if you're doing that, stay strong. We have been talking about boldness. We started with, hey, we have to have a bold faith. God calls us to be bold. Then we went to, we know how we need to be bold, but what does it look like? It starts with bold prayer, praying bold things, praying what God asks us to pray for, praying things that are bigger than what we can comprehend and understand, praying for impossible things because we have a big God. And then last week we moved to, okay, we're going to pray for big things, but we don't want to just kind of talk a big game or kind of like be big and bold in private, but we need to speak boldly, and we speak boldly the gospel. And so we talked about that last week. And then this week we're going to kind of bring it full circle, kind of the like culmination, that ending, if you will, of, okay, we speak boldly, but that must lead to bold action. And it must lead us to acting boldly. Like we talked about this picture last week of like, hey, I'm going to puff my chest out and act all big, but if I talk boldly, but it doesn't match with my life, is it really real? And so we can talk boldly, but if our lives don't match up, it's empty. And so what we want to kind of like, hey, grasp, get our minds around, like really to kind of like internalize and help live out through our life is that bold faith begins in prayer, continues in speaking, and is confirmed by action. That how do I know I have a bold faith? Yes, I pray boldly. Yes, I speak boldly. But the confirmation is, does my life, do my actions match up with how I speak and how I pray? And that will tell me if my faith is a bold faith. And so we're going to look at Daniel chapter 3. I told you, I'm not lying about that. Daniel chapter 3, and we're starting in verse 8. And we're going to look at a story that if you've been in church, you kind of have heard this before. If not, it's going to sound pretty crazy to you. So just to give some background, we have Daniel's written by a guy named Daniel. Okay, and so the book of Daniel centers kind of around him and a lot of the stuff, but he is in exile. God's people were taken into exile to Babylon. It's an empire that basically took over, just like Jerusalem and they took some of the best and brightest of Israel and took them to live in Babylon as Babylonians. And so Daniel went. And they took these other guys. You may know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Those are the names they gave them when they got to Babylon. Those are like Babylonian names. They had other names beforehand, but they tried to kind of force these people to like conform to their culture, right? That like you're no longer like an Israelite. You're going to do the stuff that the Babylonians do. And so that, like, they've already gone through this, hey, you should eat these things. They said, no, like, we follow God's laws on that. And so we've seen God kind of do some amazing things through that. But we get to this point here to where you have guys who are trying to live according to God's word. They're trying to follow God's law. But they're in the midst of a culture that is completely against that. And so there's going to be these moments of tension. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be points where they have to make a choice. And that's what we see here in chapter 3. So chapter 3, verse 8 is where we're going to start. We're going to walk through and just look at some things and help us to kind of get a grasp of what does it really mean to act boldly. Because I think we can get this idea of I'm going to act boldly, I'm going to do something brash or just outlandish or just something that's kind of it stands out, but it's not like I am going to be offensive. In fact, what we're going to see here is it's really not an aggressive thing. It's more of just standing their ground. And so what does it look like to act boldly? Daniel chapter 3, verse 8 says, "Therefore, at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, 'O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music,'" basically the awesome Babylonian band, okay, "'shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or if you see them in vegetable form, Rakshak and Beni. Okay? These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." So you may be saying, okay, what's going on here? This king, right, self-absorbed, narcissistic, he's built a statue of himself, massive statue of himself. People have said, hey, people should worship you. And he's like, yeah, I love the idea of that. That sounds fantastic, right? And so he builds a statue of himself and makes a command or a decree, which is a fancy word for a command or law. Hey, everyone, whenever the awesome Babylonian band plays, you fall down and worship the statue of me. All right? It sounds kind of like ridiculous, but that's what they did. And so everyone, when they hear this stuff, they'd fall down, except for 3 guys. Now, think of this, right? There are a lot of people that came from Jerusalem that were brought as the best and brightest of God's people to come and be made into these like Babylonians, right? But we only hear about 3 of them that refuse to do this. So there are people that are following God's laws that are going along with worshiping of this idol. And they in their minds may not think, well, I'm worshiping this idol, but hey, they're falling down and not taking a stand. And they're worshiping something. They may say, well, I'm just going to go along with it. They don't know what's in my heart. But it's clear from what we see in this story that it's not something they should be doing. Okay? And so you have people that are not fans of the Jews, and they say, hey, king, we think you're awesome. Okay? Live forever, right? Like, you're the best king ever. We don't ever want you to die. Like, that's great. Like, but there's some people that are not worshiping you. Like, it's not us. We think it's ridiculous that they're not, but they're not doing this. And you put them in these places, so I don't know. You probably don't want that, right? They're the type of people you want to smack in the face, right? Yeah, they're tattletales. No one likes a tattletale, right? And so they go and they tell them this, right? And so there's this like direct violation of the Babylonian law. But they're in a hard spot because to follow this law, they would have to be in a direct violation of God's law. And so it comes to this point to where they have to decide, okay, is my faith, what I say I do, is it really who I am, or will I fold under pressure? All right? And sometimes, right, the absolute boldest action we can take is simply not caving to the culture. I think so often we think of like, okay, we need to do this big thing for God. If I go save 100 people from being like traded and like trafficked as like slaves, like that's a bold action that God wants me to do. But when we look at God's word, a lot of times the bold action that he wants us to take is just to stand firm and not cave and give in to the culture around us. That's harder, right? We often think, all right, God, I got to go on the offensive for you. And he's saying, no, just stand where you are, where I've placed you. And stand for the truth. Stand for the law and my word and for who I am and who I've called you to be. And stand firm on that and don't be moved. You'll have enough conflict. You'll have enough things that'll come up. But the boldest action can simply be not caving to culture. Right? You've heard this phrase that your light shines brightest in the darkness. Right? You don't, on a sunny day, you turn a flashlight on, and it's like it doesn't really change anything. You go in a dark cave. When I was a child, I was not a huge fan of caves. My family from Chicago, we went down to Texas or something, and we came back and went to Merrimack Caverns or Mammoth Cave or something like some sort of cave. And I still don't love caves. Not a huge fan of the thought of like, hey, there's hundreds of thousands of tons of rock above us, and just maybe it will stay up, maybe not, or. I watched a documentary about that Thai football team that got stuck in a cave. Like, no. They're like, yeah, so we crawled and we swam, we held our breath. And like, you are insane, right? So caves are not a huge thing that I love, okay? And part of my fear of caves, let's call it what it is, right, came from when we went to this cave. I was probably 2nd or 3rd grade, so 8, 9 years old, something like that. And we go in this cave, and you got the park ranger with his awesome hat. Why do they wear those hats? I don't know. That's a separate issue. Okay? You got him giving this tour, like, okay, here's a stalactite, here's a stalagmite. Like, all this, that's fantastic. Like, why are we underground? Like, we shouldn't be here. God put us above ground. He didn't. Yeah. Anyway, so we're going through all this, and then he's like, caves are very, very dark. If you are in a cave for more than three days, that you'll go blind. And then he flips the lights off that they have on in the cave. I'm 8 or 9 years old, not wanting to be in there to start with, and we go pitch black. I mean, it's just, you can do this and you're seeing nothing, right? You can't even see, literally you can't see your hand in front of your face. And then he turns on his flashlight. There's never been a greater sight than that man's flashlight in that cave. Like, because what if he lost where the switch was? Like, yeah, that's not good. Craig thinks it's funny until he can't find it, and then we got to decide who we're eating first when they die, right? It's not good. So, all right. A light in the darkness changes everything. But a light in the light really doesn't change anything. Like, we were always meant to take our light, right? We were always meant to take the gospel into the darkness. And God has used some hard things in the lives of his church to take the darkness where it needs to go. Like the book of Acts, like the church spreads, and it's not like, hey, they decided like, hey, we're going to send out 7,000 missionaries. No, like they were being like persecuted and they ran for their lives wherever they could go. But the gospel went. The light shines brightest in the darkness. And so sometimes the boldest thing you can do is to not cave to culture. Right, here's the thing. Right, an isolated act can be seen as an accident, though. Like, you can boldly do something and just not know what's going on. You've probably never experienced this, but have you ever been the person at church where you think it's about time to stand in the main auditorium, and like you're like, okay, it's time to stand. You stand up, like you're the only one that's like standing up. It's happened to me like once or twice, and it's terrifying. Okay, and you're like, oh, or like everyone else sits down and you're in the front and you don't know, right? But if you do it once, it's like, okay, they didn't know. If you do it every week, you're the weird guy. Okay, like something done once can be a mistake. Something that's repeated and a continual thing, that's a pattern and becomes who you are, right? So one single act of boldness does not mean that you have a bold faith. But an act of boldness repeated, like continually, standing firm continually, is a bold faith, right? Think of, there's a lady named Rosa Parks. You may have heard of her during the civil rights movement. She is known not for going and like starting a fight, not for going and breaking into anything. She's known for sitting on a bus, right? Like she's known for sitting down and not moving. Even when someone said, hey, you shouldn't be here. She's known for standing her ground. Being bold is sometimes bold enough to not be moved by the culture around you. And you stand for what's right, even when everyone else is not. Bold action is the natural outflow of speaking boldly. If I'm going to speak boldly, then I better back it up. I'm going to say that the gospel changes everything. Jesus is what my life is about. Jesus is the answer to everything. Jesus is the answer to sin. Jesus is the main thing that you exist for. It's the only thing that matters. And then when it's, okay, culture is coming against what he stands for, do I cave or do I stand for it? Titus 1:16 says this, they profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. All right, they profess God. They speak boldly, but they deny him by their actions. And that is detestable, disobedient, unfit for anything. You were never meant just to speak boldly and then go hide. You were meant to speak boldly and then live that out in your life, to act boldly. Let's carry it on. Verse 13 says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, that's apparently worse than rage, it's furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar, don't name your kids that, okay, answered and said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, the Babylonian band, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made. Well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace, and who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? This is a real weird scenario that's going on here, right? Because in one sense, he's saying, hey, first of all, furious rage, hey, right? He's just ticked off. I've heard you're not doing this. And these are people that he has appointed, so he knows them. He's familiar with them. It's not like, what's your names? Rack, Shack, and Benny? Yeah, they told me. No, he knows these guys. He said, hey, they've told me you're not doing this. All right? When we said that, one momentary act of boldness can be seen as a mistake. So what he's thinking here is maybe you didn't get the memo. I know we've been having issues with the post office, supply chain issues and stuff. You didn't get the law that we sent out, all right? So, just in case you didn't know, when my awesome band, which when I think of these things, I don't know what some of it is, but then when they throw in and every other type of music, it's it just sounds, in my head, it's just noise. It's like the elementary school band, where they got the kid in the recorder, it's to me, it sounds awful. I'm sure it's an awesome band, but it sounds really bad in my head. All right? He said, hey, you may not have understood, okay? You're supposed to worship me. I'm kind of a big deal, okay? So here's what's going to happen. This band's going to play. I have them play all the time. I love their music, right? When that happens, you just fall down and worship, right? He's giving them this second chance. Maybe you stood up in church and didn't know that it wasn't time yet, okay? We're going to give you another chance, right? So here's what we do, all right? When it happens, you just stand up. But if you don't, I'm going to murder you. I mean, that's what he says, right? Like, I'm going to give you another chance, but if not, we're going to throw you in a burning, fiery furnace, right? I'm not the world's greatest parent, but I've never threatened, like, hey, bud, if you don't eat your peas, murder, okay? Right? Like, it's a huge jump, but it's this furious rage he has, right? And so they have a decision to make here, right? Because they've already taken a stand. It's like, look, we've made our statement, but I'm allergic to fiery furnaces, right? My skin melts right off when I go in there, right? It's not great for my complexion, right? And so they can say, like, hey, we've done our stance. We've let them know that what we stand for, but we're huge fans of living. So let's just do what he asked. Or we're going to clarify this was not a mistake. This was not a misunderstanding, that we are going to, right in front of this king, stand against him and say, no, we're not going to do that, right? Acting boldly is remaining true to gospel-like convictions, but it's also a refusal to compromise in the face of consequences. We can act bold when there's no consequences. That's easy, right? You can go chain yourself to the light pole outside of Starbucks because you don't like something that they do, and they're just going to be like, okay, that's weird, right? But if you take a bold stance and there's consequences to it, you had better be 100% certain that you stand for what you're saying you stand for, because it's going to cost you. They have to make that choice here, right? They've been given the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't know, right? They're given another opportunity. But will their convictions change because there's consequences? Because convictions that change when they come up against consequences are inconsequential, meaning they're worthless. Or if my convictions change based on everything that's going on around me, then I don't have convictions. I'm just blown around by whatever the popular opinion is. That's why I indoctrinate my children so hard to be Cubs fans. We're in the middle of Babylon here, in Cardinal country, right? My kid, I've never been more proud than when his Sparks leader is like, hey, on Cardinal night, Grayson kept calling the Cardinals the Dirty Birds. I was like, and? Did you give him a star or a badge or something? It's great behavior, right? Because, it'd be really easy, and I had the thought, this was in 2013 before the Cubs won a World Series, do I just stomach my pride and become a Cardinal fan? Right? Or, my kids are going to go to school, and they're getting made fun of, because at that point, it could be 125 years, since we've won something, right? Do I just change over? I was like, no. I cannot stand the Cardinals. I'm just kidding. They're not bad, right? But, your convictions can't change because people say you shouldn't have those convictions, right? Even on something as small as what's your favorite soda? Go. Dr. Pepper, right? If someone comes up to you and says, I will murder you if you don't like something else, you don't say, you should probably at that point, it's just Dr. Pepper, right? All right, what do you want me to say? Don't kill me, right? But on the things you build your life on, and the groundwork and the frame of what you say your entire existence is based on, when someone is threatening you, when there's consequences against you, you cannot cave on that. Otherwise, you don't have convictions, and you never had that faith. And encountering real consequences will expose your faith as genuine or fake. Do you continue to stand, or do you cave to the culture? All right? What does that look like? Because I think we can get this in our mind, okay, my teacher says something against God, I will burn her classroom down. No, yes. Right? No.
Yes. It's for God.
No. Okay? I can't any more clearly say, no, do not do that, right? But we can get this, hey, anything I do and say it's for God, right? I'm standing boldly. You get into a lot of trouble with that. There's things called the Crusades, right? Things that probably shouldn't have happened, things that were done in God's name that should not have happened. All right? So we have to be very careful when we say, okay, I'm going to act boldly for God. Because you acting boldly for God always should follow what God has called you to do with your life and in culture, in terms of honoring Him, and in terms of not violating His laws or His rules. And your actions should still live out the purpose he has for you, to share the gospel and to glorify him. So your act of boldness must do that. Standing and saying, I will not bow down to this. Honors God because you are following his laws. Shares the gospel because you're saying, my God is worth my life. Right? So, some things to remember. It's respectful and honoring even in the refusal. Go to the next few verses here, 16 and 17. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you on this matter. It's like, whew, not exactly the best. I don't need to answer you, man. Like, actually you do, right? I'm going to throw you in a furnace if I don't get the answer I want. But he said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, right? They're not saying, hey, jerk, right? They're respectful still, right? We have no need to answer you on this. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fire furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. They are taking a stand. They're not screaming at him. They're not cursing him out. It's just, I'm going to calmly state the facts, even though I may be peeing my pants in fear right now. I'm going to calmly say, we don't have a reason to answer you. You're king, we respect where you're at, but we're going to honor God in this. Respectful and honoring even in their refusal. And their refusal was to remain obedient to God's law, not their preferences or personal desires. Okay? I think we need to be real clear there. It's not like, hey, I didn't like that personally. It's not my favorite thing. So because I'm a Christian, I must be being persecuted, and I will honor God by taking a stand against that. It's like, well, they just said the McFurley machine was broken. Okay, like this is not breaking God's law on these things. All right? We refuse, we take a stand right against anything that asks us to violate what God would have us do. So when he says don't worship idols, worship the Lord your God and him alone, this is a direct violation of that. Your teacher asking you to take off your hat that has John 3:16 on it is not that. Right? You having a certain just a preference on how something should be is not a direct violation of God's law. We need to be very careful of putting our preferences on God and calling it God's will. We do what God calls us to do. We seek to live at peace with all men, right? That's in the Bible. But when we're called to do something, told to do something that's against God's law, against what he's called us to do, then we take a stand. Right? Our speech and actions must align to glorify God. That's what Titus 1:16 is about, right? They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works, right? So we should be aligning with God in the way that we act. But if the action that you're doing is aligning in one sense and not in the other, so like, hey, God says that I should stand for those that cannot stand for themselves. Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to stand up for the orphan and the widow. Great. But that doesn't mean you go kill the person that is oppressing them, right? Because God's law, like you don't violate God's law on one hand in order to accomplish God's work. God is bigger and better than we can grasp and understand. And so we can trust that when he says, follow what I tell you to do, we can do it. So I can trust him. So, okay, I'm going to stand up for the orphan and the widow, but I'm going to honor you, God, in the way that I do that, by following the law you've set up for me. Verse 18, right? So they've said, hey, we don't need to answer you. Not a big fan of what you are doing. We're going to follow God. And he will deliver us out of your hand, right? There's this faith that, like, God, you will not let this happen to me. God, I don't want to be thrown in a fiery furnace, and I trust that if I stand for you, you're going to take care of me. And while that's a great thought, that's a great thing to like, yeah, man, I trust God in that. The next verse we have to couple with that thought. For our faith to be complete, for our faith to be really well-rounded. Because we don't follow God and we don't have faith in God because he's a genie who will save us when we get in trouble. All right, verse 18 says this, but if not, so this is a response to that he is able to deliver us from the burning fire furnace and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, Be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So I have faith that my God is big enough to save me from something. I'm surrounded by your soldiers. We're right on the edge of your furnace here that you're going to throw me into. There's really no way I have out of this, but I know my God is big enough to save me if he wants to. And more importantly, though, but even if he doesn't, that will not change my decision here. Right? That will not change the stand that I choose to take or not. Because I'm not following God just because he's a genie who will save me. I'm following him because I trust him and I believe him. And I think and I believe and trust that it is worth my life if he asks it of me. We have to couple that with God can save me. Because God can save me, but if he doesn't, he's still good. And that's hard to wrap our heads around. That's hard to come to grips with. But if I can only take a stand for God, if I know he's going to bail me out, I really have to question, is my faith real, or am I just trying to please a genie to make sure he stays on my side? Do I have a faith that says, but even if he doesn't, my mind has not changed. I will still honor my God. We can't control the outcome, only our obedience, right? Bold faith in action is affirmed by obedience, not by the outcome. And we have to understand that. Like my faith, my bold stance wasn't successful because God miraculously saved me out of something. My bold faith was successful because I was obedient to what he called me to do. Everything in this story up until the very end seems like these guys failed miserably, right? Because they take their stand, and we're about to see the king goes from furious rage to super furious rage because they won't bow. And everything really looks like, hey, they made a really poor choice here. They died, they lose, they're done. All right? He says, we won't worship that. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So this goes from furious rage, and it changed. Because it wasn't oh, right? He went from that, wow, he's pretty mad to, I'm worried. I've never seen him look like this before, right? A couple weeks ago, maybe last week, I had a dad moment after you guys left here. My kids were in here. The drum cage thing, part of the side tipped over. My kids were playing the drums. And there's a few of you were outside, and you just hear, Landry Grace sitting right now. It was not hey guys, what's up? Welcome to Synergy, right? It was get off the shed, right? It was hardcore, not the angriest I've been in life, but it was not hey, welcome, glad you're here. It was fury will rain down upon you when we get home, right? And I don't know who it was, but there was someone outside looking kind of you could see in the face that's different and kind of scary, right? Oh, hey, I just went to dad mode. Get back here now, right? My kids, I don't even know what they were doing at the time. Something that messed with the drums, right? But so there's this, his face has changed. His countenance has changed. He's gone from angry to the most angry they've ever seen him. And they're we're going to die, right? I think they'd resigned themselves to that well before then, right? But the expression on his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. I don't know if you understand furnaces. They're hot to start with. That is their purpose, okay? If you go down on a cold day in the winter and touch the furnace in your house, it's hot. Don't do it. It will burn you, right? Don't do this, because it will drive your dad up the wall. But if you turn the thermostat up 7 times to what it is, so if you're normally at 70 in the house, you go to 490 degrees, not good, right? It is a picture of, right, it's not it's going to burn them more. No, it's a picture of his rage that he can't figure out what he's doing, but I will empty my wrath on you. And you're not getting a slap on the wrist. I will make sure that there is nothing left of you. I will wipe every memory off the face of the earth. Your bones will disappear. I will torch you. Right? It's a scorched earth, literally, mentality here of you will pay, and you will pay dearly, and it will be awful. right? And he orders it turned up 7 times, more than usually he did. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army. This is not the band of his army, right? This is like the Navy SEALs. Nothing against if you're in band, okay? You can be strong and tough. But it says the mighty men of his army, okay? Takes the mighty men to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Probably smart. If you're going to murder someone in a fiery furnace, they're probably going to fight you, bind them up, okay? And to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their other garments. Basically, hey, they were wearing things that were flammable, okay? Right? Just in case you thought like, hey, maybe they wrapped themselves in a wet blanket and survived this, right? No, okay? They're in their stuff, thrown in with ropes. Ropes, flammable, okay? Keep that in mind, okay? Because of the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Right? There's a miracle that's happened already. The guys that are throwing them in die from the heat. They're still alive before they go in, right? So there's already been a miracle that's happened that they didn't die right there. And they're thrown in, right? These 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. I don't know about you, but in my mind, for some reason, it looks a lot like a toaster. Don't know why, right? Yeah, right? And in my mind, I picture them doing, oh, the hot part's there. I'm going to stand in the corner where I don't get burned, right? I don't know why. But like, this thing killed people that were near it. So they're in it. They should die right away, just like these other guys. All right? They were willing to die on this stance. All right? And so the question becomes, right? If we can't control the outcome, we can only control our obedience. Like, are we all going to die as martyrs? Maybe. All right? And that's the fact you have to be resigned to. We don't seek pain. We don't seek death. We don't seek that. But as a follower of Christ, you should have resigned yourself to that, hey, if my life is asked of me, I will willingly give it because I've already died to myself, and God is the one who has control of it. I'll take a stand for him. If it costs me my life here, it costs me my life. I've already made that choice when I chose to follow him. But we need to understand, right? There's a freedom in that. God doesn't call us to change people's minds, right? God did not call these guys, hey, change Nebuchadnezzar's mind or you failed. He said, stand for what I've told you to. Be firm in your convictions. Be obedient and you win. Even if he doesn't save us, we'll still be obedient. There's a quote by a fellow named Oswald Chambers. It's a fun name. Name your kids it if you want. It says, faith for my deliverance is not faith in God. All right, faith for my deliverance is not faith in God. Faith means whether I am visibly delivered or not, I will stick to my belief that God is love. There are some things only learned in a fiery furnace. All right? That I don't have faith just because God saves me. I have faith whether he saves me or not. So how can we win even when we look like we're losing? The next 2 verses. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king. He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. All right, so you have this amazing thing. God shows up. I think there's some funny things in here too, right? They threw him in bound. The ropes burn and disappear, right? But then they're still there. Hopefully their clothes are not, okay? Not burnt. Hopefully their clothes are still there. Sorry, that sounded kind of weird. Hopefully their clothes burned. Oh, that's weird. No one should be thinking that, right? Hopefully they're still there. But they're walking around the fire. Like, think of how awesome is it for those guys that jumped in, like, we're going to die. Like, I'm not dying. Are you dying? No, not dying. Your ropes are gone. That's awesome. I'm getting tired. Right? My hands were hurting. All right? But like, what do you do? Like, do you go walk out of the furnace? Like, hey, king, we didn't die. What do you want us to do now? Just walk around? Okay, right? Like, kind of like humorous there. Like, I guess just walk around. Like, I don't want to stand here. It gets stiff. I just walk back and forth in this. Like, it's funny, right? Like, but they didn't have a care in the world. Like, we got thrown into a furnace and didn't die. Like, anything else you want to do today? Want to go fishing? Like, there's just There's a peace that comes like, hey, I have stood on my principles and convictions to trust God. The worst possible thing that could happen has happened, and I'm okay. Why? Because there's a fourth one in there. God shows up, right? How can we do this? Why? Because God is with us in our suffering. But their faith looked like it was leading to their death. It seemed like failure, but the Holy Spirit in us, helping us pray, helping us speak boldly, helping us act boldly, is still with us as we go through what happens after we do that. God does not leave you when you said, all right, I'm going to give you the words to say, give you the courage to act. Good luck, right? He doesn't peace out then. He's there in the midst of the consequences, pain, struggle, and suffering. He's there with you. He has gone through it already when he died on the cross. And he's with you in your pain, in your suffering, in your consequences. One of the most overused, misquoted verse in the Bible, tattooed on people's arms to help them hit home runs. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Jesus was not talking about a double hit in the gap in like the wild card game. Paul said this as he's going through persecution, as he's going through the pain and suffering that happens when you take a stand for Christ. And what he is saying is, I can endure pain. I can endure persecution. I can do this. I can take the stand and keep standing when the world is trying to knock me down, when the culture is trying to crush me and scorched earth wipe me out. I can do this. Not because I have some superhuman strength, a great will, I'm a Navy SEAL, can just grit through it. I can do this, right? I can do this through him who strengthens me. My God is with me in my suffering. My God is with me as I endure. And I can do it because he is with me. We're called to a bold faith. It begins in bold prayer for God to be glorified and the gospel to be proclaimed. And it continues, right, in speaking boldly and boldly declaring the gospel that changed your life, that changed my life. And it culminates in a life that matches up boldly standing in that gospel, standing for it, not being moved by a culture that says you shouldn't trust that. You should have a different stance. You should think differently about this. You should have a different opinion when it comes to this. You're wrong on this, and you stand boldly, firmly, because you have the Holy Spirit of God in you, and you know the gospel, you know his word, and you will not back down. A bold faith is a whole life faith. All of me like endeavor that seeks to glorify God in every aspect of my life as he lives through me. That is the goal of your life. That is what your life was meant to be as a follower of Christ. Not I go to VBS and then I go into student ministry and we go on mission trips and go to camp and do some stuff, and then I kind of go live my own life and then go to church so my kids don't turn out to be horrible human beings, and then I die and hope I did enough good things. That's not the goal of your life. The goal of your life is to be changed by the gospel of Jesus and glorify him with all of your life, with your prayers and your words and your life matching up to boldly stand on your convictions for him, and your life points to him. He lives through you. That's why you're here. That's why you exist. That's what a bold faith looks like. And the question that we're going to end with is just basically, is that your faith? Is that the faith that you have? And you may have been coming here forever. You may have been here your entire life. You may be here for the first time this week. I promise you, I don't always say people should get their clothes melted off in fiery furnaces, right? But the question is still the same either way. Do you have a faith that your words match your actions, and that is as bold as he's called you to be? Right? We've been called to be as bold as lions. You have a whole life faith that is lived out to glorify God. Just because you've gone on a mission trip doesn't mean that's true. Just because you own a Bible doesn't mean that's true. Just because you come here doesn't mean it's true. All are good things. But if you have not said, Jesus, my life is yours, my whole life, every moment of it, every day, every hour, every minute, every interaction, every thought, everything is done for you, for your glory, for your name, and I will take a stand wherever I can for you. And if it costs my life, so be it. It's a hard choice. Harder than picking something to watch on Netflix. right? You'll spend 30, 40 minutes, like tonight, trying to find something to watch. Maybe take that same amount of time and think about your faith. Is it really what I say it is? Is it really a bold faith that Jesus lives through me? Or is it a surface level, I'm blown around by culture and just do whatever because I don't want to make waves? Stand boldly. You have a lion inside of you. Let him live through you. Why? Because he's good? Yes. Because what he calls us to is best? Yes. And selfishly, think of the amazing things you'll see him do. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thought they were going to die. Then they got to walk around in a furnace. No one else has done that and lived, right? That's going to look great on their LinkedIn profile, okay? Where's your faith?